Hello and welcome to Ellesmere, Shropshire, which is my hometown. Behind me, you can see a warehouse that was used for the loading and offloading of goods, as this was part of the Shropshire Union Canal. And you can see, even though it's frozen, you can see the Shropshire Union Canal behind me. I want to use my hometown of Ellesmere just to unpick something about the essay and why the essay has remained a resilient format. So this is Pete's Cap. Pete is a local legend, also known as the Doc. Pete's been open for many years. An old friend of mine who I went to school with, his daughter Christine, now runs Pete's. Many a time I sat in Pete's Cap when I was visiting here, marking essays, portfolios and other written submissions. This is the square in Ellesmere. Over there you can see Bones and Watson, local estate agents, and if I pop through the door, which I'm not going to do, I might later, my sister works in there. She runs Bones and Watson's. Just over there is the Coral Chinese, which has been open since the mid-70s. A good friend of mine, who I also went to school with, runs the Coral, and I've marked essays in there, in the back. Well, Tommy made me something to eat, my friend Tom. I was just explaining to my new friend here that this is the Mere, obviously Ellesmere. And the important thing about Ellesmere is, and the Mere, you must never ever, if you visit, refer to it as a lake. The locals, me being a local, they don't take kindly to it. It's a mere. Don't ever say the lake, always refer to the mere. In fact, it got so contentious on the local Facebook community group, conversations about lakes or meres got banned. Anyway, over there you can just see that little atoll, I guess. That's Moscow Island, named after when, supposedly, I've no idea if it's true, when Napoleon was defeated at Moscow. Right over there, you can see, just in the distance, there's a little bit of frost on the ground, what we call the crimps. I'm just going to zoom in. And you can actually walk, I'm not going to do it on this video, you can walk all the way round. Isn't it a lovely day? You can walk all the way round. But the important point for this video is I have marked at various points all the way around here, right up until the crimps. This is the Jeb Garden. In fact, well, all of this way is the Jeb Garden. So called and named after the Jeb sisters, who in 1919 were instrumental in forming Save the Children, the Save the Children Fund, and their Victorian upbringing and house is about a mile away from here. And yes, you've guessed it, I have marked here. I've marked on that bench. So let's get into why the written assessment is so powerful after our short visit to my hometown of Ellesmere. As always, it's important to note I look at this through the lens of systems, processes and scalability. As a rule, I don't actually get into pedagogical matters. That's a completely different topic that other people are covering in quite a lot of depth. And so, not to repeat them, I look at it from this alternative perspective or framework. So in previous videos, I've discussed the way in which AI might be integrated by students into their submission. But what I really want to concentrate on here is why the essay is so embedded and powerful, and why it's going to be so problematic to try and shift to alternative forms of labour. And I think this really is about labour. Yes, we can use a lot of different tools to support us as academics and others in higher education, but there's a whole conversation about process, productivity and scalability and wage theft. And I'm going to talk about wage theft as well, that we need to think about. And so if we think about the fixed points in assessment, the first fixed point is all assessments have to have a release point. So we release our assessments, and then all assessments have a deadline, right? The submission point. Now, depending on the type of assessment that we do, we can ramp up or decrease the level of complexity, the organizational administration needed, and also the complexity and the time needed for individual academic members of staff. As an extreme example of this, which most institutions and academics do not do, we could, in theory, release an assessment, and between that point and the submission point, do very little else.
Also, if an academic member of staff or more than one academic member of staff becomes ill, this still progresses to the submission point. If we switch away from the essay to other forms of assessment, and one of the responses to AI has been about using in-person vivas as a means of assessment, which is used today, we suddenly ramp up the amount of administration and complexity that occurs between these 2 points. And this end submission point is not a submission point in the sense that it's a deadline. It's a process of collection of getting students to undertake a task before the end point. And what I mean by that is, if we say to students on the 4th of the 25th, you're going to do an in-person presentation for 10 minutes, suddenly between this release point and this end point, I now have to find rooms for them to be scheduled into. I have to find academics to man those rooms. Depending on my regulation, I also potentially have to have 2 academics per room for moderation purposes. In some organisations, they film the presentations to get around that. Now, you could say, well, they could just submit the presentations online. And that's right, and that's closer to a written assessment. But you still actually, as I'll discuss, ramp up the complexity. Because if you ask a student to make a 10-minute recording, by and large, it's going to take you a minimum of 10 minutes per recording to mark it, because you've got to watch all of it. And as we'll see with the assessment, that's not actually true. So let's just think about the back office for a moment. When students submit, it goes into the submission system. In most institutions, this is also tied up to management information systems. Student submission rates, when they submit, when they have problems, are tied to intervention processes, i.e., if a student doesn't submit work, they'll be contacted to do X, Y, and Z, and we'll try and retrieve those students. If you move away from a system where you have written submissions, yes, there are other types of things that you can submit online, but I'm talking here about the alternative that some people have proposed about doing more and more things in person. If we move to a system where more and more things are done in person, you are actually creating a lag and a need for a manual intervention, in that the assessors need to upload their marks and feedback about the assessment the student's done, so that it is in the system and in the management information system. So there is a lag and potential for dark data in terms of what's lost. Many universities, therefore, will be highly resistant to this, because it makes it more complicated to intervene early and to audit what's happening. And also, as well, having seen this myself over many years, people lose stuff, right? Or they forget to upload it. It's the same process as when some universities have tried manual register systems. They never work because people forget to upload them. So as soon as you move to people doing things in person where they have to collect records and upload them somewhere, you create the opportunities for error and inefficiency. And written assessments via these kind of processes and systems avoid that. And that's part of the other reason we're going to see a resistance to a move away, even when it becomes apparent that we have all of the integrity issues that we mentioned. The next issue, and the reason why the assessment is so popular, is that it's to do with, frankly, the precarious nature of labour in our systems. So in our systems, we have lots of workers stroke employees who are on temporary contracts. They're either paid on a fixed term contract or they are paid by module. If they're paid by module, that module will have a workload model attached to it. The workload model makes assumptions based on written assessments about how long it takes to produce and mark a piece of work. As soon as we switch away from the essay or written assessments, we create a whole series of problems for significant amounts of our labour, because The essay represents something that is readily accessible, as we discussed on the previous slide in terms of the back office, but it's portable in the ways that I described in my video in Ellesmere. Fundamentally, you can pick up and put down essays as you want, right? You can have discontinuity. You are not required within your marking window to mark them all in one go. I can mark some on a train. I can mark some in Pete's Calf. I can mark some. I used to mark dissertations on long flights to New York when I took my annual summer holiday, right? But there is discontinuity in that I can pick up and drop as I need to, which means for that workforce, and actually for other academic workforces, it's a really powerful format because of the flexibility in terms of they are things that you can mark anywhere at any point. The other well, I say benefit, I'm not sure it is a benefit. The other thing about the essay is you can design assessments and have modules running where you have, and I'm not recommending this is not a recommendation of best practice, you can have students work on assessments where you have no idea who will who will mark those essays once they are submitted, right? So there's not only maximum flexibility in process, maximum flexibility in terms of the back office and monitoring, but there's also maximum flexibility in terms of flexible capitalism and the system that we operate in. As individual units, there isn't really another format that's as flexible as the essay in terms of distribution and collection for marking and assessment purposes. These benefits also are mirrored on the student side, in that if we look at higher education in the United Kingdom and other places, we are in a period of enormous flux. Many people are talking about that student attendance is down on campus. We also have all sorts of issues around cost of living crisis, the fact that the student loan doesn't go as far as possible. The essay for students, regardless of its pedagogical merits, is actually really beneficial for the complexity of life that many of our students have, for the same reasons we've just talked about with precarious academic staff, in that they can pick it up and put it down as they need to. Doesn't mean that they come up with an output that they're proud of, but it does mean that they can effectively flex the essay around their schedule. That's more difficult to do with more complicated assessment that require specialist software or equipment, or require you to interact with others to create or to present. And any academic who has ever done in-person PowerPoint presentations with students knows that there are always students who get in touch to say, I can't do a presentation at 11 o'clock at this time on this day for these reasons. The reasons don't matter, in that all it is another symptom or example of the complexity that you add when you start to do things in person. So from a student point of view, actually, essays also have that portability, right? And they are also the most economically easy and cheapest assessment for a student to do. I suppose pen and paper might be even cheaper, but who knows?